2 hours after I gave birth, I held my daughter toward Grant and asked, "Do you want to take her?" He never moved from the foot of the bed. Instead, he set an envelope beside the bassinet and said, "I already have a son with Blythe Carver. I'm not signing anything that puts this baby into the Ellison succession." The papers inside had been prepared before I reached the hospital. As my body still shook from labor, Grant did not ask me to sign that morning, yet every page carried the certainty of a plan already in motion. He had moved his clothes out, rented an apartment for Blythe, and told his family I had agreed to end the marriage after delivery. "How long have you been planning to leave?" I asked. "Long enough to do what my family needs before my father names someone else," he answered, and I understood he saw 2 children as competing evidence for the future he wanted. I pulled my daughter against my chest and watched his eyes avoid the name we had chosen together. "Remember this room," I told him, "because this is the last time you decide whether we count as your family." He gave a small laugh, the kind he used when he believed someone would calm down and become useful again. Then Blythe called, and he stepped into the hallway without asking whether our daughter was healthy or whether I could stand. My sister Dana arrived before Grant came back, still wearing the sweater she had thrown on for the drive across town. She looked at the envelope, the empty chair, and the newborn curled against me, then asked, "What do you need first?" I handed her the baby and asked her to photograph every page, including the time-stamped message showing when Grant left. Dana sat in the chair he had abandoned, and the first person who stayed with me was not the man who had promised the nurses he could not wait to be a father. I stayed in the hospital because my doctor wanted a night of observation, and Dana handled everything Grant had promised to do. She tracked my medication and held my daughter while I slept. When I opened my phone, Grant was everywhere inside it, assembling the crib, comparing paint samples, talking to the baby during my final ultrasound. 3 hours before I delivered, he had texted, "Today is the most important day of our lives." That night, Grant called while Dana stood by the window with the baby. He never asked whether either of us was all right. He wanted to know whether Dana had contacted his family, whether I had shown anyone the separation papers, and whether I could stay quiet until the succession review ended. "I still want us to handle this like adults," he said, as though adulthood meant protecting the schedule he built around leaving me. I kept my voice level because my daughter had fallen asleep. "You brought a plan to leave your wife into a recovery room. Don't call my silence protection for the children." Grant began explaining that conflict would follow both babies, but I ended the call before he could make his consequences sound like my decision. Dana turned my phone face down, because his first call had shown what mattered most. After discharge, I returned home only long enough to collect what the baby and I needed. Grant's side of the closet was nearly empty. His laptop was gone, and 2 wedding photographs had been removed. Dana found a storage receipt dated weeks before labor began. Inside the nursery, he finished himself. I understood that every night he came home. He knew where he planned to go. I rented a house near Dana and left the accounts untouched for expenses. I changed no locks, posted nothing, and saved every message. Some nights I handed my daughter to Dana and cried in the bathroom until my breathing settled. By morning, the crib photographs, empty closet, and dated receipt remained where Grant had left them. Once I could sit through a meeting, Dana drove me to Miriam Polk's office with my daughter asleep against my chest. Miriam read Grant's papers, then explained that refusing to sign at the hospital did not erase him as a father, because our daughter was born during the marriage. Minnesota law presumed Grant's paternity unless a court determined otherwise. The envelope beside my hospital bed proved intention, not authority. I asked whether I could keep him away after what he had done, and Miriam did not soften the answer. Being a terrible husband does not automatically end his rights as a father. She recommended primary custody, scheduled visits, notice, and a record of every cancellation. I agreed, because I wanted Grant judged by what he did after receiving a chance. not by how well I described the moment he walked away. Miriam opened the Ellison trust rules Grant had included behind the separation proposal. Nothing in the language favored sons, and nothing allowed Grant to decide which child counted as a descendant. One section mattered more. Anyone appointed to manage benefits for the next generation had to pass a review of honesty, conflicts, and responsibility toward beneficiaries. Grant was being prepared for that role, but hiding a child with a direct report while trying to exclude another could trigger that review. I looked at my daughter and understood this was not about taking something from Blythe's son. Both children could be protected, while the man using them as leverage could lose the right to control either future. Miriam warned that the outcome was not guaranteed and that the trust issue would not replace the divorce. Still, the rules had stripped Grant's threat of the power he thought it carried. Before we left, Miriam asked for messages and documents tied to his claims. Dana slid her phone across the desk with the pictures organized by time. I handed over the texts Grant sent before labor and the one demanding silence afterward. For the first time since the birth, the evidence belonged to someone who knew what it could prove. Blythe called after Miriam sent notice that Grant's trust roll was under review. She did not apologize, and I did not offer forgiveness. She asked whether Grant had filed for separation before our daughter was born, because he had sworn the marriage existed only on paper. I sent her a photograph of him finishing the nursery wall before labor. Blythe answered with a picture of Grant holding her son in the apartment he had rented. The timestamp matched the weekend he texted me that he wanted only to bring our daughter home. Grant had told Blythe he was staying with me until the pregnancy ended safely. He used one weekend to make two women believe they were standing inside his real life. She admitted she called the hospital because Grant kept delaying the announcement he promised. Malcolm had met her son, and Grant presented that meeting as proof the Ellisons accepted her and the baby. Blythe believed the birth would force him to leave me openly. She had no idea he would answer her pressure by entering my recovery room and rejecting the daughter whose crib he finished. I knew he was married, she said, and I kept believing what made that easier. I told her his lies did not erase that choice. Blythe did not argue. Instead, she sent a thread Grant had written to Cody Rains, the friend he trusted with the plan. Grant wrote that Blythe and the boy only needed to remain visible until Malcolm believed he had created a stable next generation. Once Grant controlled the trust, he planned to move them from Minneapolis and avoid another marriage that might complicate his image. Blythe had not been chosen over me. She had been assigned a longer role in the same arrangement. She agreed to let her attorney provide the messages tied to Grant's promises, Malcolm's visit, and the succession plan. She also began establishing paternity and support for her son without Grant controlling the timing. We did not become friends, and neither of us pretended the harm between us had disappeared. After that call, Grant no longer owned the only version of what he had done. The trust review took place in the independent administrator's office, with Grant, Malcolm, the trust attorney, and counsel for both mothers attending the portions concerning us. I was not there to claim a place inside the Ellison family, and Blythe was not asking for her son to outrank my daughter. The administrator opened with one question. Can Grant be trusted to manage benefits for either child after telling 4 different versions of the same life? Grant answered. This was a private relationship that became complicated, but the apartment lease and separation papers showed how he had planned it. Malcolm admitted he had met Blythe's son before I gave birth and knew Grant intended to leave me. He told me the marriage was already over, except on paper. He explained, without looking toward me. Miriam placed Grant's messages beside him and replied. During that same period, he discussed his daughter's name, parental leave, and family visits after bringing her home. Malcolm had accepted the version protecting the schedule because checking it might have delayed everything. The administrator opened the trust document and asked, "Show me where a son carries greater standing than a daughter." Grant shifted and answered, "That is how this family has always understood succession." Malcolm could not identify a written rule supporting him. Then the messages to Cody were read, including Grant's plan to keep Blythe visible until he controlled the trust and move her away afterward. Effective immediately. You are removed from every role involving either child's benefits, the administrator told Grant. Your succession review is suspended because you concealed conflicts, made false statements, and treated 2 children as leverage for authority. The decision had nothing to do with whom Grant claimed to love. His access to the trust records was disabled before the meeting ended. His calendar was reassigned, his pending approvals transferred, and Malcolm left without waiting for him. Grant remained seated with the separation plan he had carried into my hospital room, resting inside the evidence file. He had entered that room believing paper could erase a daughter. Now paper had removed him from the future he built the lie to control. After the review, Grant met Blythe at a diner and tried to make me responsible for what he had lost. He told her I had turned the children against him and used private messages to destroy their future. Blythe placed her phone between them, opened the thread where he planned to move her away after securing control, and asked, "Which part of this future was ever mine?" Grant called it something he wrote to calm a pregnant woman, but she did not let him rename it. "Every promise to me becomes reassurance when it hurts you," Blythe told him, "but every sacrifice you wanted from me was supposed to be permanent." She had submitted her resignation through an attorney and would discuss their son only through the paternity process. Leaving cost her the job she had built and forced her to begin again with a newborn. It gave Grant one less place to hide behind authority. He came to my rental that evening without notice, carrying a separation proposal and the careful voice he used when he wanted agreement to sound reasonable. Grant offered better terms if I withdrew the documents and told Malcolm he was trying to repair things. "The review is no longer mine to stop," I told him. "I cannot certify a fatherhood you have not practiced." Then he asked to hold our daughter. I handed him the visitation schedule Miriam had sent and showed him the first appointment. Grant stared at the date because it overlapped with a meeting he had arranged to ask Malcolm for another chance. "Can we move it to next week?" he asked, after arriving to say he would do anything. I did not argue or remind him of the hospital. I asked him to send the change through counsel so the request would be recorded, then took the schedule back when he loosened his grip. Grant walked down the steps with the separation papers under his arm. Before he reached his car, he had chosen his position over his daughter, and no one else had written the choice for him. The divorce moved through mediation, where the house was sold, property divided, and primary custody placed with me. Grant received visitation and support based on income and time spent caring for our daughter. I did not ask to block him from seeing her or use the trust review to claim anything outside the marriage. The separation plan he carried into my hospital room decided nothing once we entered a process he could not control alone. Grant attended the first visits after Malcolm told him responsibility mattered more than apologies. He arrived on time twice, held our daughter, and sent photographs to his father before leaving. During the third visit, he checked his phone whenever she fussed, then asked whether I would tell Malcolm he was making progress. When Malcolm explained that visitation would not restore the succession review, Grant started arriving late, shortening appointments, and canceling them. Miriam kept every change on the calendar, but I never needed to explain the pattern. Each crossed-out visit appeared after Grant learned there was no position waiting behind it. Blythe completed the paternity process, and her son received support and protections Grant had delayed. The independent manager confirmed both children remained protected under the trust, while Grant could not manage either child's benefits. Grant had believed a son would give him authority and a daughter would weaken his claim. In the end, both children were protected, and the way he treated them removed him from every decision he wanted to control. Malcolm appointed someone else to handle the next generation's interests and stopped treating bloodline as proof of character. Grant still had paths to know both children, but neither mother had to accept promises in place of attendance. The final order left the door open without holding it open for him. I followed the schedule, Blythe followed the support order, and Grant faced obligations no title could perform. He had used fatherhood like an application for power, then lost interest when that application was denied. The empty spaces on 2 calendars became the record of father he had chosen to be. A year later, my daughter and I lived near Dana, and I worked at the Performing Arts Center. The piece was ordinary: breakfast before daycare, laundry in the hallway, and mornings when I no longer checked whether my husband had lied overnight. Dana came by without asking, and Malcolm saw his granddaughter in public places after months of respecting every boundary I set. He arrived on time, brought nothing expensive, and never asked me to call his effort forgiveness. Blythe found another job and contacted me only when something affected both children. We were not friends, but we agreed they would not grow up hearing 2 stories shaped by Grant. Cody lost Malcolm's confidence after the messages showed he had known the plan and waited until Grant stopped being useful. Giving us proof did not make him a good man. Grant called one evening and said he finally understood that he wanted to be a father. I asked if he knew our daughter's last birthday, and the silence answered first. I can learn from the beginning, he offered, but the visitation process had never disappeared. Then he asked whether I would tell Malcolm he was changing, and I knew the call still began with something he wanted back. I told Grant he could build a relationship through the visits he attended, but I would not turn one phone call into evidence of change. After I hung up, I returned to dinner with Dana, my daughter, and Miles Corbett, the man I had been seeing for months. Miles never tried to rescue me. He arrived when promised and treated consistency like something normal. Grant once said my daughter had no place in his future, but she had a full life now, and he could enter it only by learning to stay. Grant still has a path back to his daughter, but no one is saving his place anymore. Do you believe a father who repeatedly chose power deserves another chance because he finally feels alone? Tell me what you would require before trusting him again, and exactly where forgiveness should end.